Are you ready for children? Somebody asked that question. So you need to take some tests. Number one, take the mess test. The mess test means smear peanut butter on the sofa and curtains. Now rub your hands in the wet flower bed and rub on the walls. Cover the stains with crayons. Place a fish stick behind the couch and leave it there all summer. And if you can do all that, you are ready for children. Number two, the toy test. Obtain a 55-gallon box of Legos. If Legos are not available, you may substitute roofing tacks or broken bottles. Have a friend spread them all over the house, put on a blindfold, try to walk to the bathroom or kitchen. Do not scream. This could wake the child at night. And if you can pass the toy test, you're ready for children. Let's try the grocery store test. Borrow one or two small animals. Goats are best. And take them with you as you shop at the grocery store. Always keep them in sight and pay for anything they eat or damage. And you have passed the grocery test. How about the dressing test? Obtain one large unhappy live octopus. Stuff into a small net bag, making sure that all arms stay inside. And if you can pass that test, then you're ready to dress an infant or toddler. Feeding test. Obtain a large plastic milk jug. Fill halfway with water. Suspend from the ceiling with a stout cord. Start the jug swinging. Try to insert spoonfuls of soggy cereal, such as Fruit Loops or Cheerios, into the mouth of the jug while pretending to be on an airplane. Now dump the contents of the jug on the floor. And you are ready for children. Night test. Prepare by obtaining a small cloth bag and fill it with 8 to 12 pounds of sand. Soak it thoroughly in water. At 8 p.m., begin to waltz and hum with the bag until 9 p.m. Lay down your bag and set your alarm for 10 p.m. Get up, pick up your bag, sing every song you've ever heard. Make up about a dozen more and sing these two until 4 a.m. Set your alarm for 5 a.m. Get up and make breakfast. Keep this up for 5 years and look cheerful at your job, and you are ready for children. The physical test. Obtain a large beanbag chair and attach it to the front of your clothes. Leave it there for 9 months. Now remove 10 of the beans, and you are ready for the physical test, ladies, the pregnancy. Final assignment. Find a couple who already has a small child. Lecture them on how they can improve their discipline, their patience, their tolerance, their toilet training, and their child's table manners. Suggest many ways they can improve. Emphasize to them that they should never allow their children to run riotous. Enjoy this experience. It'll be the last time that you will have all of the answers. The Christian home has been called a laboratory for the application of biblical truth in a relational setting. Your home is a laboratory where Bible truth is to be applied in a relational setting. All right? That's what we want to work at today. Ephesians chapter number 6 and verse number 4. And I really want to deal with today the basics of biblical parenting. The basics of biblical parenting. Verse number 1, the Bible says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise that it may be well with thee, that thou mayest live long on the earth. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord." I think it's interesting here that it doesn't say church bring them up, but it does say fathers bring them up. The primary responsibility of children lies on the parents. And certainly there's things given to the children here, so you can read verse number 1 and understand what is to be the environment of the home. The environment is to be one of obedience in that relationship. Honor is to be another factor or environment of the home. Honor thy father and mother, and there's a promise with that. But then it speaks to the fathers lastly in this passage, and it says, "Provoke not them your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord." Biblical basics of parenting. Biblical purpose of parenting is not just to have kids that don't smoke, drink, or do drugs. I think sometimes we bought into all the don'ts and forgotten about the do. Just to be satisfied to get your kids some things that they're not supposed to do is not the end goal of parenting. The biblical purpose of parenting is godliness. We're talking about biblical basics. Turn in your Bibles to Malachi chapter 2. Malachi chapter number 2. I think a very interesting passage here. Malachi chapter 2 is God dealing with Judah and through the prophet. And in this particular passage, men were dealing with their wives treacherously. They were putting them away. They were divorcing them. And God wasn't pleased with any of that. And God spoke to them and says, "You've wearied me." And they say, "Well, how have we wearied you?" And God answers that question in verses 14 through 16, where it says, "Yet ye say, wherefore, because the Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously. Yet is she thy companion and the wife of thy covenant, and did not he make one?" Or when he brings a man and woman together, doesn't he bring them together as one? "Yet had he the residue of the Spirit, and wherefore one?" Why one? God asked. That he might seek a what? A godly seed. The reason God brought you and your mate together, if he allows you to bear children, one of the primary reasons is that you might raise a godly seed. Godliness is the goal of parenting for a Christian parent. That's different than being a good kid. You understand? Yeah. See, a lot of parents have set their goal on, well, if my kid just doesn't, do what most of the kids in our society does, I'll just be thrilled. Well, your goal as a parent is not goodness. But your goal as a parent is to raise seed that would be godly. That's a big, big part of the basics of parenting. That you get the purpose right. The purpose has to be right. The purpose is going to dictate a lot of your parenting. If your mind is set on godliness, not just on, well, if I can just raise them to avoid some things and be a decent contributor to society. When I was growing up, my dad had a grapevine in our backyard. And during late summer, that vine would always be hanging with bunches, clusters of grapes. Other vines that were unattended and uncultivated would dry up and die. Why do some vines dry up and die and other vines are flourishing? Some are nourished. Some are cared for. Somebody understands what that vine needs in order to produce the end goal of luscious, sweet grapes off the vine. And some are unattended, and some are uncared for, and someone is not taking attention to give those vines what they need to produce and fulfill their intended purpose. When Jesus, or when God speaks of Israel, he talks about Israel being a vineyard and all the things that he did as the caretaker of that vineyard, as the caretaker of that vine, so that that vine would produce, right? Can you understand a mental picture this morning of your children? And some of you may have grandchildren, and you have an opportunity to influence them in the right direction. That your children are a lot like a grapevine. They have potential for producing an abundant amount of fruit, watch this, for God. Yet, they have a potential of drying up and being fruitless. As a parent, we want to make sure we're putting into them what the Bible instructs us to prepare them as vines to produce godly fruit out of their lives down the road. Paul wrote this in Ephesians to indicate that this is going to be an ongoing process that will continue until the child is grown, to bring them up In the nurture and the admonition, that those two words imply care. They imply investment. They imply, man, I've got something very special here given to me from God. I'm not the owner of these children, but God gave them to me. He's the owner. He has a way that He wants them raised, that they're going to produce in their lives godly fruit that others will be able to enjoy. And so, with that, let me deal with some false thinking regarding purposes this morning. Some parents think that their purpose in raising children is for their children to like them. That is not your primary purpose as a parent. The primary purpose is godliness. And I'll tell you, if you're going to raise them toward godliness, not every decision you make will make them happy with you. If your end goal is, my kids need to like me, chances are you're going to make some decisions that are going to go against what godliness is going to look like in their lives. Remember this morning that your goal is not to be liked by them. All of us want to be liked. That's a natural thing for all of us. But understand, if you're raising children, it's not going to be that way all the time. Number two, I know parents who put their kid in the public school and reason, well, I made it through that, they will too. Or in other words, I'm going to try to reproduce my life in my kids. Your goal is not to reproduce your life in your kids. Your goal is to reproduce a godly life, to lead them towards a course that hopefully is a higher road than what your life looked at their ages. Hopefully they get more investment, they get more nurturing, they get more biblical instruction. They have a better godly environment in your home than maybe what you grew up with. It's not just to reproduce who I am. I've had many people, well, I made it through the public school, preacher. Why can't my kids make it through the public school? And by the way, I'm not here, if your kid's in a public school today, I'm not here to bash you, but you have to understand there are major threats in the public school against what you're expecting from them in godliness and what they're learning from their church and learning from the scriptures. There's going to be a strong conflict between what they're getting in evolution and humanism and morals in a public school. And because you made it through in a generation where there happened to be some character still that people lived by, doesn't mean that there's people in the public school today that have that same foundation. Boy, things have changed over the years. And so we need to understand that. Others think that their purpose ends at providing a roof over their head, clothing for their backs, and food on the table. I'm a dad, man. I'm providing. Isn't that? No, let's get back to the goal. The goal is what? The goal is godliness. The goal is godliness. Should we provide a roof over their head? Should we provide clothing? Should we provide food on the table? Absolutely. But that doesn't fulfill the end goal altogether of godliness. Godliness is important. Some parents think that their purpose is to give their child the American dream. And can I warn you this morning, affluency can kill spirituality. Affluency, your children getting everything that they want all the time, can kill spirituality. The American dream can set a course for a child that they're pursuing materialism and their God of pleasure, and they got the money to do it all. By the way, I don't think that we should teach them to take everything off the government and live high off other people. I think they ought to work a job and bear responsibility and see the fruit of their labors. But be careful not to just raise your kids on the American dream. That's not the end goal. Still others think that parenting is leaving decisions up to their 6-year-old. You know, I was told everything that I had to do, so I'm going to have a home and we're going to swing the pendulum way over here, that my kids are just going to make all the decisions. When we get to training, training means to narrow. The theme of the conference is train up a child. If you look up that verse in Proverbs 22 and verse number 6, it means to narrow. Here's the understanding you need to have about your children and my children. They all have a sin nature. And left to themselves without somebody training and narrowing their life, they will make wrong choices that will bring upon them bad consequences. And so parenting, my job is to bring them up on purpose in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. A study of the combination of nurture and admonition in our text means a steady balance of instruction and training mixed with chastening and rebuke. That's what he's dealing with here. There's a mixture. There's good ingredients in training children. Nurture and admonition. Those are vital words. Admonition means to instruct. It means to put them in mind of something. It means to impart understanding. It means to set right. It means to fix in their minds. Cultivate them with things that are godly. It means to call attention to. It means to warn of danger and the effects of wrongdoing. To call attention to something in my children's life must mean that I am alert to what is going on in their lives. You know, the average parent today spends 1 hour a day with their children. That's 7 hours a week in a 172-hour week. Who else gets that time? Who else is influencing those kids during that time? 7 hours isn't much. 7 hours doesn't give a lot of time to call attention to train, to put in mind, to set things right. It's my job as a dad to be warning and calling things to their attention. That being in mind, we have a handout I want to give out to you at this time. If the gentleman could hand out the Aim to Train handout. I have 4 handouts for you today. Hopefully will be a help. The Aim to Train handout is admonition in practice. So we'll just stop in this part of the session and just give you this handout. This handout was something that we developed through trial and error over godliness. This handout literally grew. It started small as I sat under biblical teaching and preaching and raising children and learned some things from my growing up time. And I'll tell you how it worked. Literally, it was folded like this for years. And on my Bible, next to my chair, where we would have our family time with God, it would be in the front cover of my Bible like that. Folded piece of paper. Doesn't seem significant. But when we would have times to train, we would have family time, family altar, family devotions, whatever you want to call it. Always part of our training, always part of our family time with God was something to train on. We called it a training focus. And we worked through this. And training doesn't happen, those of you that are parents of young ones, it doesn't happen, you say it once and they got it forever. Like it doesn't happen that way. We have a phrase in our church, and my church knows it. They probably get tired of it. It's called regroup and retrain. In fact, this coming Sunday night, we have a leadership meeting. We do every January. You know why? Because leadership needs regrouped and they need retrained. 2 weeks ago, we had a special music meeting. All of our musicians, pianists, people that sing at nursing homes, special music, choir members, junior choir members, directors, instrumentalists, orchestra, all of them. You know what we're doing? We're retraining. We're reminding them of some things, reminding them of some expectations, the way we do it at Mount Zion Baptist Church. We have a watchman ministry. It's our security ministry. You know what they just had? They just had a meeting. You know what it's about? Retraining. Retraining. If you're a parent, guess what? You're going to teach them how to say yes, sir, and they're not going to do it probably the first time. You're going to teach them how to sit in church and keep their eyes on the preacher and have their Bibles open and not go out for a bathroom break, and guess what? It ain't going to happen the way that you taught it. So what do you have to do? You have to go back and you have to admonish again. What's that? Put in mind. Fix their mind to. What I'm giving you is something very practical that you can use. Grandparents, they come over to your house. This is something very practical that you can use. And I'm sure that your children that have your grandchildren will not have a problem with you talking to them about obeying the first time. Okay? So, admonish. I don't have time to go through all those, but there's a lot of practical areas there. The purpose of nurturing is to chasten or discipline. We'll spend more time on this in the next session. Purpose, the basics of biblical parenting. Purpose, it narrows life. It narrows life. I remember as a young parent, my 2-year-old daughter got a very bad word in her vocabulary. And she got it with an attitude. It's the word no. 2-letter word, Jenna. And Jenna, no. And I remember the first time it happened, the hair on my neck went up. I looked at her eyes and I thought, where did she get that from? And we didn't get on top of it as soon as we should have. And it turned into a monster. No! That's the way she was talking to us. And I thought, me and my wife sat down and said, boy, we're going to have a mess on our hands if we don't get on top of this. And we began to get on top of it. We began to pray and fast and be consistent in discipline with her. I remember my girls loving to read about horses and being readers. All of our kids we taught to be readers, but their reading materials were going too much in a non-purposeful direction. And I remember, boy, if I just take them to the library and let them get books of their interest, they're going to put all their time into all of that and no time into anything reading godly. And I remember going, we're going to change this. I'm going to give them books to read. And they're going to have godly content in them. And we're going to substitute some of that other reading out for godly content. What was I doing? I was understanding that, boy, they were widening and I wanted to get them back on purpose. And purpose has to be input. Input determines whether that purpose is fulfilled or not. And so, boy, we start giving them books. You know what my kids do? They come home from Bible college where they're reading lots of godly stuff. And you know what they do usually? They're like, Dad, do you have any book I can read? You bet I do. I always have a book for them to read. Why? Because I'm trying to narrow life. Training is narrowing. Purpose, parent, you got to stay narrow. Narrow is godliness. And that's going to dictate a lot of other things. I remember taking basketball away from my son for a while. And when I did it, he would tell you the story today, if he were here, that it was probably one of the best things that happened in his life, because he realized during that time that it had become a god to him. He would use that terminology. I pruned. It was painful. He didn't like me. I remember him coming back and saying, Dad, can I start to play again? I said, nope, not yet. I said, I'll know the time. I said, you give yourself to the things that we've talked about. I'll know the time. And it was narrowing. I'm not saying we've done it all right. There are other areas that we could have narrowed further. We could have trained. But I am saying this. You as a parent have to stay on purpose. The basic of biblical parenting this morning that you've got to get in this first session is I've got to stay, my mind and me and my wife have got to stay on point on this. And that purpose is godliness. It's godliness. For instance, why would I encourage my young children to watch filthy cartoons of the day when my purpose is to train them up in the holiness and purity of God? I can't let that. Purpose also helps me to establish priorities. When godliness is my purpose, church, biblical instruction, training become a priority. Spiritual training in study of the scriptures becomes a priority. Giving my kids good spiritual books becomes a priority. Television's not a priority. Not where purpose is godliness. Video games is not a priority. Not saying my kid never played a video game. I'm saying this, it didn't dictate our homes. It better not dictate your home. If godliness is the end goal here, it can't dictate your home. You understand, we have grown-up men today that are coming home and playing 6 and 8 hours of video games in churches. They grew up and they can't get rid of it. They can't kick the habit, so they're living their lives. I counseled a while ago within my own church. Young man grew up that way, came out in the counseling session. His structure was go to work, come home, not talk to his wife, not do anything around the house, not help anywhere, not lead anything spiritually, come home and play his favorite video games. You understand that doesn't produce godliness. Spiritual exercises produce godliness. And technology, if you're not careful, will take away your children. It'll gobble their minds up. It'll gobble their views of life up. It'll gobble their relationships up, where they won't be able to even have a conversation face to face with somebody because they're connected to digital all the time. Be careful, be careful. I'm trying to help us this morning. Purpose helps to establish priorities. Purpose helps to identify needed habits. Biblical purpose is godliness. Bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. A personal daily devotional life is a habit you need to work with your children on. Again, I'm just speaking from some years of working with young people. I was youth pastor in our church for 10 years before I became the pastor back in 2012. In our youth group, we always had an emphasis on spiritual disciplines and positive peer pressure. I wanted those two things. I wanted our kids to be spiritually disciplined and know how to put into practice spiritual disciplines, and I wanted positive peer pressure in our youth group. And so we would come and we would actually have them fill out a slip. How many days did you have devotions this week out of 7? They would turn that into us. We would then sit down and have a time where they could share devotions. And listen to me carefully. I could tell you the kids that we're going to have problems with down the road. I could tell you the ones that we're going to marry wrong. You know why? Week after week after week, they showed up with nothing from the Scriptures. I'm talking 13, 14, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. There was no walk with God. There was nothing emphasized. And it revealed to me something about what was going on in the home. That it wasn't probably just their problem. It was that parents were not helping them to develop habits that help us in godliness. You understand, purpose dictates habits. If your purpose is to lose weight, you're going to have some habits. You're going to have some eating habits that are probably different than maybe mine. You're going to have some exercise habits that are different than mine. Why? Because you got a purpose. If the purpose is godliness, then the right habits in your home have to be developed. You have to work with them on that. If you're schooling your children at home, start the day, build into their schedule time with the Lord when they can read. Sit down and read with them the Scripture. Show them how to start a day. These are basics. We would sit down, we lay on the floor together, put the Bible, have all the kids around, and they had their Bibles out, and we would just take, this is 10, 11, 12 years old, we'd take 5 verses, and I'd ask questions about it with them so that they're learning to think about the Scriptures and ask questions and answer questions, and how does it apply to our lives. Our homeschool started with devotions. Before school started, personal devotions were a part of their daily habit. Why? Because the goal is godliness. If the goal is godliness, then the habits have to be pointed in that direction. Faithful church attendance is vital if we're going to train godliness. We've got to teach faithfulness into them. God's a faithful God. One of his qualities is faithfulness. If we're going to be God-like, we need to develop faithfulness. The sports teams on Wednesday nights didn't fit into that purpose. So, well, Dad, this other boy in the church, he's going to play on this team, but they play on Wednesday nights. Well, son, we're not going to do that because there's a higher priority in our life. It's called church. And you know what? My kids today still make decisions that when it comes to church days, nothing else happens. But watch this. It doesn't happen unless you train it. Unless you help establish the habits, it's not going to happen. They're listening to what they're getting trained in, but they're also watching in what they're being trained in. And so faithfulness, commitment to witnessing is an important habit. Our kids were out on outreach. Well, preacher, they were 3 years old. Yep, they were 3 years old. And they came with us. They were in their car seats, and When we got out, they got out, and we walked to the door with them, and they just learned that, you know what? If I'm going to please God, we've got to be interested in people, lost people. We had neighbors over to our house for meals and witnessed, and we prayed for those neighbors together and family, and they saw neighbors get saved. Habits are determined by purpose. Basics of parenting. Purpose helped me to identify what to train my children in. What to train my children in. The Holy Scriptures, according to 2 Timothy chapter 3, that we need to train them, make them wise unto salvation. Proverbs 4 talks about, he taught me also and said unto me, let thine heart retain my words and keep my commandments and live. Get this, write this statement down if you're taking notes today. If a man does not teach his children truth, others will teach them error. If you don't teach truth in your home, somebody else is going to teach error. You better get truth so they know what the world error looks like. We would, big part of our training was painting scenarios. We had a family devotions, and I'm almost finished here. We had a family devotions on, what if they say? What if they say? My kids still remember it. Dad, that family devotion series on what if you say? What if they say? We started out with, what if somebody comes up to you, Brandon, and says, you know, I don't see anything wrong with a man having long hair. What are you going to say to that? Is that just a difference of opinion, or does God's Word have something to say about that? Well, let's go to the Bible, and let's look at what the Bible says. What if they say, well, you know, I really don't see any problem with, watching something that has a lot of swear words or bedroom scenes in it. You know, you're at a house, and somebody turns on something. What's a godly person going to do in that situation? What if they say? What were we preparing them for? Somebody's going to say that. Somebody's going to think that way. Somebody around you is going to influence or try to influence you in a wrong direction, maybe not even purposely trying to influence, it's just who they are. And how are you going to think? Are you going to think biblically in that way? And so, those are some things that I would give you on the basics of parenting this morning. You must have the purpose of godliness. The purpose of godliness. Mom and Dad, you can get distracted. A fire person on a fire rescue team can get distracted, but the purpose of every fire member on that team is to rescue people from the fire. Don't get distracted in your parenting. Well, this opportunity looks good. This opportunity looks good. You better filter everything through that purpose. Is this going to steer them in the direction of godliness? Or is this a threat to that direction? Your habits, your training, your priorities, all of that's going to shape your child. May God help us to stay on purpose. Let's pray.